Hi, I'm Pam Fox. Welcome back to my Bible study in the book of Genesis. Today we're in Genesis chapter 32. If you're new here, I'm just going through the book of Genesis. We've been going verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We're in chapter 32 today, and we are still in the part of Genesis that goes into quite a bit of detail on the life, perspectively speaking. A lot of these characters in the Old Testament, they get a little bit of attention, but not a lot of attention. Jacob is one that gets quite a bit of attention, and then his son Joseph is going to really steal the final chapters of the book of Genesis. There's going to be quite a bit on his life, quite a bit of detail. Um, but right now we're talking about Jacob, and just as a little bit of a reminder, Jacob is the son of Isaac and the son of Abraham. And God visited Abraham to begin a covenant with Abraham that would extend through down his lineage, down his family tree. God reconfirmed the covenant with his son Isaac, and he reconfirmed it with his son Jacob, which is who we're talking about now. Um, that the land there, what we know as Israel, um, would be a holy land. It would be the land of God's chosen people. And it would be the land where God would one day return and set up his kingdom, the new heaven, the new heaven, the new earth. And we see that in different prophetic scriptures throughout the Bible. This idea that this is the Holy Land. And so last week in chapter 31, we were just trucking along in the life of Jacob, and this was the point where Jacob said to his father-in-law, who was his cousin, you know what, it's time for us to go. I want to take my family, I want to take my wealth, and I want to leave and go back to my homeland, go back to my family. I don't want to work for you anymore. I want to start my own home. I want to work for myself. And Laban didn't like that because everything Jacob did turned to gold. Essentially, he was of great value as one of his employees, and so he didn't want him to leave. So they struck this deal. Jacob said, "Well, what if all the speckled and the striped animals, you give those to me?" And Laban was fine because the speckled and the striped were the rare animals, and they were considered the imperfect animals. And so he's like, "Yeah, that's fine. Take all the speckled and striped animals. That's fine." And before they made this agreement, and Laban right away, he went out and he instructed the shepherds to remove any of the speckled and spotted animals of Jacob's livestock, of his herd, so that he would have no chance to build upon any, two speckled animals. He had no chance of really building upon that because he wanted to keep his son-in-law Jacob there. He wanted to keep him there. He wanted to work him probably till the day he died. He wanted to take advantage of him. And so then what ends up happening is it worked in Jacob's favor. The animals started producing more speckled and spotted, and before you knew it, all of Laban's livestock then, or nearly all of it, became Jacob's. And so Jacob became a wealthy man, probably in a course of a couple of years. Um, and so instead of going to Laban and saying, "Okay, sorry this deal didn't work out in your favor, but we're out of here. I'm taking my family. I'm taking my animals. See ya. We're going to leave now." Instead, they sneak out. They sneak out when Laban is gone. Laban finds out about it. He assembles an army of people and he pursues in hot pursuit of Jacob. And then we saw that last week where he caught up with him and he basically told him, "This is my family." Laban did. He said, "Those are my daughters. Those are my sons." Speaking of Jacob's sons, because they were his grandsons. But he said, "But I can't provide for them. How could I care for them? You've taken everything." And so he did strike a deal with Jacob, but only because the night before he had a visit from God, and God told him to leave Jacob alone. And I don't really know. Maybe we'll find out whatever happens to Laban. I don't recall if the Bible talks about Laban and what ends up happening to him, but he did He did disobey God. God told him to leave Jacob alone. He said, don't talk to him, don't say anything positive, don't say anything negative, which to me means to leave him alone. I guess you could say something neutral. But what he ends up saying to Jacob is, this is my family, but I can't provide for them. So therefore, let's make a covenant or let's make a peace agreement. And so they do. They make a peace agreement and they build this altar and they have a meal there, and they basically promise, if I come to visit you, it won't be for harm. If you come to visit me, it won't be for harm. We are at peace. And so that was last week. There in chapter 31, it ends up. It says early in the morning, rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them, and Laban departed and returned unto his place. Which leads us to chapter 32. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Okay, so right away here in chapter 32, we see Jacob leaves. He goes on his way with his camp, his household, all his people, all his livestock. He leaves that place where he, kind of had a peace agreement there with his father-in-law. And it says, and the angels of God. Okay, so that word host in the Hebrew is a word. Let's look at it really quick. It's important that we understand the meanings of these words and really get a picture of what he's experiencing here after he left that place and went on his way. He says the angels of God met him, and he said this is God's host. So this word host, an encampment, an army, soldiers, angels, cattle, locusts, stars, an army, a band, a battle, a camp, a drove. This is an idea of a very large number, a host. It's kind of synonymous with the word multitude. So many, it's hard to count. There's so many. And he is encountering a host of angels. So I just like to envision these things in my mind and kind of picture, like, pretend I'm there and I'm witnessing all of this. Jacob was encountered with a host of angels, so many angels that they couldn't be counted or numbered, which would have been an amazing and incredible to experience. Just like, what? What is happening here? Oh my gosh, what is this? This is incredible. A host of God's angels. And by the way, that word host, when we see it used throughout the Bible, I just gave you some examples. An army, angels, the stars, locusts. I don't know. I find that interesting because prophetically speaking, we see in the book of Revelation, which is a book about prophecy of the end times, we see locusts, a host of locusts being released from the bottomless pit. We also see an army that is numbered. It's like 200 million man army or something like that that's going to go against Jesus and his army in that final battle. All that to say that these are large numbers of people, right? A host. So he called the place Mahanaim, which means a double camp. Again, like if you think of a host in terms of an army, when you're building your army, you want it to be strong, but you want to have those numbers, right? You want to have as many people as possible, and they knew that back then. And when they would camp for the night, you can't just go and go and go. You have to stop and you have to repair injuries, you're injured and you have to eat and rest. On both sides of the battle, they all had to do that. And so they would set up these encampments. And so Jacob is calling this, because of the vast number of angels that he witnessed there, he's calling it a double camp, and a double encampment. A double encampment. That's the name of the place. All right, let's go on. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks and men servants and women servants. And I have sent to tell my lord that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee. and 400 men with him. So Jacob meets this host of angels, and we are given no other details about that meeting, about that experience that he had, other than they met him on his way. This host of angels came to meet Jacob on his way. Why? We don't know. Maybe God sent them as a source of strength to let Jacob know that he's not alone, because Jacob has some fears about returning home. Remember why he left? It was to flee from his brother Esau, because he stole the birthright and he stole the blessing from him when he was out. He tricked him, and he was hot mad, and his mom Rebecca said, "You need to leave, or your brother's probably going to kill you." So now he's coming back. It's been 20 years. He's coming back, and he's still afraid of what Esau might do to him. He's afraid he might kill his whole family and kill him. He's probably afraid for himself, but he's probably, I would imagine, we can't forget that God started this covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob. This covenant that through this family, through this lineage, would come a nation of God's chosen people, a kingdom. And so, if he gets killed and all his sons get killed, God's going to have to start all over. And so Jacob is worried. And I know God's not sitting up in heaven going, "Oh, I'm really worried. Esau's going to kill Jacob. And then what am I going to do?" God's not doing that, but Jacob is, because Jacob's human. And so Jacob is kind of trying to go sort through all of this, and he's afraid. So God sends in a host of angels, maybe to give him strength, maybe to give him reassurance, maybe to remind him of the covenant that I am your God and you are my people, and I will be with thee and I will bless thee. So he encounters this host of angels, and then he goes about worrying about what he's going to do. How am I going to take control of this situation? How am I going to assure that I'm not killed? How am I going to assure that Esau's not going to kill my entire household? Okay. So what does he do? He sends a messenger ahead to tell Esau, Jacob's coming home. And he's bringing with him this great amount of wealth. Okay? And he also, if you notice the way he words it, this is really what you would consider a gentle startup, which is to say he's trying to soften his brother. By what? He sent messengers to Esau saying, he commanded them saying, "Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau." It's a very humble, right? He's sending this messenger to talk to Esau, "My lord Esau. My lord Esau, your brother, your humble brother Jacob is coming home." He says to say to them, "My lord Esau, thy servant Jacob," that's a position of that humility and that servitude. "Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned, I've been with Laban, our cousin, I've been there for 20 years. Until now, I'm coming home and I have all this wealth with me." And he says, "I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight." In other words, this messenger is going to Esau to send a message from his humble brother asking for grace, which means mercy, which means grace means unmerited mercy. It means he's asking for his forgiveness even though he knows he doesn't deserve it, because he's admitting he tricked him. He took the birthright, he took the blessing. He's admitting his guilt by saying, I'm asking for grace in thy sight. Okay, verse 6. We already read this part, but let's read it again. "The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee with 400 men. So now Jacob, he receives this message from the messenger that, we told Esau, and he's on his way to meet you, and he's bringing 400 men with him, which now he's assuming that Jacob's coming to kill him. He's bringing 400 men with him. That's an army. If he was just coming to shake hands or give him a hug and a kiss and say, all is well, I forgive you, he wouldn't need that army. That's the presumption that Jacob is making. But you also have to remember that people would often travel in large groups for protection, to take care of one another, to do all the work that was needed to be done, setting up the tents, taking down the tents, collecting the food, butchering animals, feeding people, caring for one another, caring for injuries. You had people that were more, medicinally oriented, doctors, people that were more soldier oriented, you're the strongest of the group. people who took care of the children, people who cooked the food, people, whatever. So everybody had kind of had jobs within these groups, these traveling groups. And the more people you had, the stronger your group was, right? Because you had more people that can contribute to the group. And so it could have just been, when Esau decided to go meet his brother, that he had his posse with him for those reasons. It could have been he feared Jacob. Maybe Jacob was tricking him again, and he was really coming with an army to kill Esau, or to take more from Esau. So we don't know. We don't know, but Esau did. He was coming. He was coming to meet Jacob with 400 men. So Jacob, at this point, he's very fearful. Verse 7. And so then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He was greatly afraid and distressed. So what does he do? It says, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into 2 bands. Okay? So if you're new to this story, you need to understand that this is Jacob's way of protecting himself and protecting his family and protecting his assets. He thinks to himself, if I divide our household up into 2 groups, then when Esau comes and to meet, if he's coming for nefarious purposes, he'll have a battle with the one group, and it'll give the other group a chance to escape. So I won't lose everything. I'll just lose half of everything. I think that's the mentality here of breaking them up into 2 groups. So into 2 bands, verse 8, and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. Verse 9, and Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I become 2 bands. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. I'm assuming he's talking about all 4 of his wives. Maybe he's just talking about Rachel, the one he loved. We don't know. Let's go back over that a little bit. So he's praying to God. He starts out his prayer with another gentle startup. He starts it out with humility and gratitude, right? What does he say? He says, O God, the Father of Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saideth unto me, remember, God, you're the one that told me to leave Laban and go back home. The one who saideth unto me, return into thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. He's reminding God that you're the one that said you'd be with me. You're the one that said you'd bless me. Now he's in a position where he's afraid, and he's crying out to God to intervene, to help, but he's reminding him first, you're the one that told me to come here. You're the one that said that you would be with me. And then he really humbles himself before God. He says, I'm not worthy of the least of all of your mercies. He reminds God of how God has shown blessing to your servant. Again, he's humbling himself before God. He's reminding of the time he passed over the Jordan, and now he says, I have become 2 bands. I've had to divide my household up into 2 groups in order to try to save at least half of it. Then he says, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother. That's the prayer. That's the ask. That's the big ask. Save me from the hand of my brother. For I fear him, that he's going to come and smite me and the mother and my children. He goes on with the prayer and says, thou saidest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Jacob's reminding God of the covenant. You're the one that said, he said, thou saidest, I will surely do thee good. And I don't know if there's an attitude with Jacob and all of this, like, you said, God, you told me, and now look what happened to me. I don't know that that's his attitude. Maybe he's just having this dialogue, with a very honest dialogue with God. God, you said this, and now here I am, and I'm scared. I'm not trying to presume that I know Jacob's heart here. I just recognize some of this terminology in my own experience. Sometimes when you go to God, it's like, like when we start out saying holy and righteous Father in heaven, it's really to kind of set the tone that we understand who you are and who I am, your God. So I'm not trying to make any presumptions here that Jacob had, a really bad attitude. But he is saying, he's reminding God, you said, I will surely do thee good and make thy seed as the sands of the sea, which cannot be numbered for a multitude. So that was the promise of the covenant. Remember, through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, that seed would come a nation. And there's more to it than that. But he's reminding God that it would be through my seed that would come a multitude, that can't be numbered. And so now we're about to all be slaughtered. So he's letting God know of his fear. He's kind of laying it all out here. Um, and then in verse 13 it says, and he lodged there that same night, and he took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, which is 60 camels, 40 kine, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 fowls, or foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, pass over before the space betwixt drove and drove. So this is the gift for Esau, all of this livestock, and it's quite a lot. It's a peace offering. It's a white flag. He sends his servants ahead of them. Remember, Esau's coming this way, Jacob's coming this way. So Jacob sends his servants ahead with this gift to meet Esau, to soften Esau, to let Esau know I come in peace, to let Esau know I want to bury the hatchet. So he sends ahead these servants with all of this livestock to put space between the two camps, between the gift for Esau and the people that are left behind. And the groups that would have gone, there would have been people, there would have been shepherds that would have, they wouldn't have just sent the animals, it would have been people that went. So that was the first group that he sent ahead. So we see Jacob talk about these two camps, but in a minute we're going to see, or maybe it's in the next chapter, but we're actually going to see he divides his household up into 4 camps. Okay? So that as Esau comes along, he gets a little bit softer and a little bit softer and a little bit softer. And we'll see that it works, although we don't know that it works. Maybe Esau never came with, evil purposes. Maybe he really did come to meet his brother and to bury the hatchet. It doesn't say. Before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove, and the word drove means a herd. Verse 17, and he commanded the foremost, saying, so the foremost is that group that's at the very front, the first group that Esau will encounter. He commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meeteth thee and asketh thee, saying, whose art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? So Jacob is imagining that this first group that Esau encounters, Esau's going to be like, hey, how's it going? Who are you? Where you come from? And, who owns all of this livestock? Esau's going to ask all these questions. And he instructs the servants. He says, then thou shalt say, they be thy servant Jacob's. Again, really softening Esau by setting up this picture that Jacob, your brother, your twin brother, is your servant. He has humbled himself. He's coming home to be your servant. They be thy servants Jacob. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau. And behold also, he is behind us. So the servants are instructed to say, this is all for you. It's a gift from your brother, your servant, my lord. It's a gift. And he's behind us. He's coming. He's coming. And so commanded he the second. So there's a second group there. I think that first group is broken up into 3 groups is the way I understand it. And then the final group would be Jacob and his children and his wives. And so he commanded the second and the third and all that followed, the droves, saying, on this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. So when you encounter Esau, this is what I want you to say. And say ye moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us. Thy servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, peradventure he will accept of me. So he's saying it. He's telling his servants to tell Esau, this is a gift to hopefully soften your heart so that you'll have mercy, so that you'll forgive me, so that you'll show grace, so that you will accept me. So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. So he sends this ahead. And that's kind of in this chapter, that's the wrap up of that portion of this chapter. Now the chapter is going to pivot into what happens to Jacob next. And it's the title of this video, Jacob Wrestles with God. Now I personally find this really interesting. I think at first glance when you read this story, it's very confusing. What is happening here? It doesn't really make any sense. And there isn't a lot of explanation. But I'll tell you right now, the general understanding or agreement among the Christians and among Christian doctrine is that these little verses right here, there's just 5 or 6 verses of Jacob wrestling with God, is that Jacob is actually wrestling with God. And it's this picture of endurance that Jacob has in not submitting to God. It's this picture of Jacob prevailing only because he eventually submits to God. It's really a typology, I think, for you and me to understand that God sometimes allows pain in our life. He allows suffering. He allows a handicap, which we'll see here, in order to really get our attention, in order to bring about change, those positive changes that really transform us to be more like the image of Christ, which is the whole point of our lives here on this earth as believers. At least that's our doctrine, is that we live our lives becoming more and more like Christ, being transformed throughout our lives to become holy, to become more and more holy, which is to say, to become more understanding people, to become more forgiving people, to become more sympathetic people, to become more loving people, to become more servant-oriented people, to serve the people in our lives instead of focusing on what's in it for me. That's holiness. It's to be loving and kind, to be peaceful and patient. These are all attributes of holiness, and it's the work that's being done in our lives by the Spirit of God that lives in us throughout our lives. And sometimes we experience hardship, and that can be God really allowing us to experience hardship so that he can bring about that change. And it doesn't say here, and we're going to read it here in a moment, these final 6 verses. It doesn't really say what kind of change God is trying to bring about in Jacob. If I were to guess, it would be faithfulness, right? God has done so much for Jacob up to this point. And now he tells him, I want you to take your family and go home. And all the way home, Jacob is fearful because he's afraid that his brother Esau is going to kill him and everyone he loves. And there goes the covenant with God as far as this nation that's going to be born out of this bloodline. So Jacob is afraid, and he finds himself alone. And then he has this encounter with a man. And it says that the man wrestles with Jacob. It doesn't say that Jacob initiates this brawl or whatever you want to call it. And it's a physical, literal fight. Some people want to say it's that this fight is symbolic for something else, which could be. That's not the way I interpret it, just because of the way it's written here. But he's going to find himself alone, and he's going to encounter a man who's going to wrestle with him. All right, so let's read it. All right, verse 22. It says, and he rose up that night. So remember, Jacob sends ahead this gift with the servants, the messengers, and he puts space between them and his family. And they're camping there in the night. And he wakes up in the night. It's dark. It's quiet. And he can't sleep. And he has an idea. He says, I'm going to take my wives and my children, and I'm going to take them away from this camp. I'm going to separate them, even this camp that's here, that's remaining, which would have been, more servants and more livestock and more wealth. I'm going to take my wives and my children, and I'm going to even separate them even more so. So it says he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons. So the 12th son hasn't been born yet. That's Benjamin. It's the second son he'll have with his wife Rachel, the one he loved. He says he took them and he passed over the ford Jabbok. So the ford Jabbok, if we look at it on a Bible map, it was a brook not too far away from the Jordan River. So they're just on the outskirts of modern day Jerusalem is where they would have been at this moment. And Jacob wakes up in the night. He takes his 4 wives and his 11 sons. It doesn't mention the daughter Dinah here. Maybe she was with them and she's just not mentioned, or maybe he left her behind. We don't know. But he takes them and he removes them even further away from that camp to the ford Jabbok. It says, verse 23, and he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. So he sends them over the brook, which is to say they would have waded through this brook over to the other side. And it says, and he sent over that he had. So whatever else they brought with them, if maybe more servants, maybe some cattle, maybe some gold, I don't know, it doesn't say. Whatever they took with them in the night when they left their camp, he sent that with his wives and his children. He sent them away to hide, I'm presuming, to be apart from this battle that might take place. And then it says Jacob was left alone. So now Jacob is all alone. Gone off, his camp is over here, and he's all alone. It says, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. So Jacob's all alone, and a man wrestles with him until the break of day. So until the sun comes up, which we don't know what time it is here. It could be midnight, could be 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So he could have wrestled for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours until the sun came up. He wrestles. The man wrestles with Jacob. It says it twice. It says, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. And we'll see it again in verse 25 as he, the man, wrestled with him. So let's take a closer look at this. First of all, I want to take a look at this word man. So the word man is used in the Hebrew language. There are 4 different words used for the word man. There's Adam, which we see in Genesis 1 in the very beginning when God created man. Let us make man in our image. And this is the word for human or humanity or earthlings, Adam. Then there's also the word Enosh, which is describing a different type of man. It's really describing the weakness of humanity, or the expiration date that we have. You know what I mean? Like we're born, we live, then we die. We all know that. We have an expiration date. We don't live forever, at least not in these human bodies. So the word Enosh, it describes the weakness of humanity, the mortality of humanity. And then there's the word Geber, which is, when it's used, it's emphasizing that this particular man is a strong man, that's a able-bodied man. It's really more of a focus on the physicality of man and the strength of man in their physical body. So it might be describing, I didn't look up any examples, but if I were to try to think of an example, I might think of, maybe Goliath, that physicality, that strength. I'm not saying that word is used to describe Goliath. I want to make that clear. And then the 4th word is the word Ish, which is a male person, right? Male as opposed to female. Let's look at that word really quick, because that's the word that the author is using here in chapter 32. So if we go into our Strongs and we find this word man, there he wrestled a man. It's the Hebrew word Ish. And if we look at it, it's a male person. But if we go a little bit deeper to get a fuller understanding of what exactly they're talking about, this particular male person, it's a husband. It's a good, great, and mighty man. It's a certain man. It's a man of high degree, a husbandman, a kind man, a steward, and one who is worthy, a worthy man. And what's really interesting about this, for me personally, when I hear that the general consensus among Christians is that Jacob is wrestling with God, it's like, okay, what's the evidence for that? And we're going to see quite a bit of evidence for that as we read along. But the first evidence of it, really, you could speculate, is right here in this word man. Because many of these words in the Strongs that are helping us understand this particular chosen word, this word ish, is a particular man, is a worthy man, is a steward. And Jesus was a steward of God. He came to do his Father's business. He was a steward of God. And he's worthy. Worthy is the Lamb who is slain to take away the sins of the world. And he's a husband, right? We know that Jesus considered, he talks about it in the Gospels, about there is no greater love that a man can have for another than to lay down his life. And he was talking about that in the context of husbands loving their wives, laying down their life. And that's exactly what Jesus did for the church. He laid down his life. So when we look at this word ish and we look at the different words that help us understand its meaning, we see all these words that describe Jesus Christ himself. All right, so let's move on. Let's read it again. Verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. Okay, 25. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, so Jacob saw that he prevailed not against him. They were wrestling. What you need to understand is, if you've ever watched a wrestling match where they're kind of in a gridlock because they're so equally matched, and they're in that gridlock where they're just bound together and they're not moving, and they're trying to figure out a move, but to every move they make there's an equal and opposite counter move, and they're in that gridlock. Or if you've ever watched an arm wrestling match between two people who are equally matched, what do? They're gridlocked. They're like this until the person who has the least amount of endurance finally succumbs, and then the other person with more endurance wins, even though they have equal strength. It's the one with more endurance, or maybe more mental ability, right? It's that mental game that wins. And so Jacob finds himself in this gridlock with this man. It says, and when he saw that he prevailed not against him. In other words, they're in that gridlock. He can't overcome him. It says he touched the hollow of his thigh. That is, this man. He touches the hollow of Jacob's thigh. The hollow of Jacob's thigh would have been like the, what do you call that? The ACL? Can't remember. It's the tendon that runs down the front of the thigh. I think that's what they're talking about here. And I base that upon something that's said later, but we'll move on here. It says he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. So now not only are they in gridlock as they wrestle, now Jacob has been given a handicap so that they're not quite so equally matched as they wrestle into the night and into the morning. It's very curious. It's a very strange thing, isn't it? And he said, let me go. Now this is the man talking. For the day breaketh. So the sun is beginning to rise, and they've been in gridlock all night. Jacob's been given a handicap, and he still will not submit to this man. They're in this gridlock, and he will not submit to this man. He will not give up. He continues to fight. And now this man says, let me go, for the day breaketh. And what does Jacob say? He says, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. So here, the way I understand it, if you've ever watched the show Survivor, towards the end of the season, they have these challenges, these endurance challenges. And oftentimes, almost always, what you'll see is it'll come down to two people fighting for this immunity trophy, right? That's going to give them all the power. And one of them will start to realize, I can't go much longer. I can't make it much longer. In whatever this endurance challenge is, I know I've only got a few minutes left in me. Maybe they've been up all night standing on a log or something like that. And the other person's probably thinking the same thing. So one of them will reach out and say, if you let me win this immunity challenge, I'll take you with me. I promise I'll take you with me to the end. So they strike a deal, right? That's kind of what I see here. Jacob knows that he can't go much longer. This man is saying, he's giving him an out. He's saying, just let me go. Just, give in. The sun is about to rise, and Jacob knows he's got other things to deal with. His brother is in hot pursuit of him. His entire household is out there, and he's not there with them. He's got other things to do. And the angel says, let me go. He gives him an out. He says, let me go. I'm saying angel. I should have said this man. Um, this man has been referred to as an angel. He's been referred to as God, and he's been referred to as Christ. You can decide for yourself who you think it is. I think it's Christ. Um, so he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless. So he's striking a deal with this man. I'll let you go if you bless me, if I can get something out of it. And really, again, what I'm seeing here, if you think about, like, if you're a parent and you've ever had kids, for example, if they say, you say, it's time to go to bed, go get in bed or whatever, and they start to negotiate, I need a drink of water first, or I need a story, or I need this, or I need that. And oftentimes the parent will say, okay, I'm happy to give you a story. And it's just a way to give that child a little bit of say in what's happening, a little bit of power in the circumstances. And so this man says, okay, I'll bless you. And that's what we see next. He says, let go of me, for the day breaketh. He said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. Verse 27. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. So the man asks him, tell me your name. And he says, my name's Jacob. And they're still in the gridlock, I'm assuming. Maybe not. I suppose it doesn't matter. But he says, tell me your name. He says, my name's Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob. Now, where do we see people getting renamed in the Bible? Well, we saw it with Abraham and Sarah. Who gave them their new name? Who has the authority to rename people? We see the patriarchs, several of them all throughout the Old Testament we see them being renamed. And we see it in the New Testament too. And who did the renaming? It was Jesus. Jesus gave his apostles new names. We also see it in prophecy for the end times, where we see believers are going to be given a new name by God. Okay? So he says, tell me your name. He says, Jacob. He says, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. Now, this name Israel, it means he will rule as God. He will rule as God, or it means God rules. And we know that Jacob isn't going to become a ruler, but through his line will come King Jesus, who is prophetically, who has been very prophetically and very, I'm at a loss for the word, but the prophecy very clearly tells us that Jesus will set up his millennial kingdom, right? That there will be a millennial kingdom where Jesus will be King of Kings. That's talked about in the book of Revelation in the end times prophecy. So this word Israel, he will rule as God. That's prophetic. The word Israel is a prophecy in of itself that Jesus will rule as God. So he renames Jacob. He says, your name is Israel. He says, for a prince, so here's the blessing, for as a prince thou hast power with God and with men and hast prevailed. He's telling Jacob, you have prevailed. In this wrestling match, you've prevailed. And I already said it before. How did he prevail? He prevailed through submission. He prevailed through giving in. He prevailed by letting this man win. He prevailed by what do they say? Say uncle? If you don't know what that means, it's an English, American, like when you give in, you say uncle. Uncle, and then that means you give up. That's how he prevailed, by submitting to this man, by submitting to God, if it is indeed God. So the blessing here, let's read it again. For as a prince thou hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So there's a lot here. First of all, he says, as a prince hast thou power with God, which means you have power because God is with you, and with men, which means you have power over men because God is with you, and has prevailed. Now, I want to look at something really quick, because this little phrase right here, as a prince hast thou power, when we look at other translations, other biblical translations, that little phrase, as a prince hast thou power, the meaning there, that as a prince has that power, it's a picture of fighting. It's a picture of striving. It's a picture of struggling. It's a picture of wrestling. Okay, let's look at it in the ESV translation. Um, where is it? Well, I lost it. Let's bring it up here really quick. Just take me a second. Genesis 32. There's my search. Chapter 32, verse 28. So this is in the ESV. Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Okay. So right there in the blessing, this man is basically saying who he is. You have striven, you have struggled, you have wrestled with God and have prevailed. And again, the prevailing is the humility. The prevailing is the giving in. The prevailing is humbling yourself before God and being faithful to God. That's what I see here. I see Jacob wrestling and being stubborn, right? Like you and I can do. And I see a lot of really takeaways here for you and I, because God wants to do a work in you. He wants to do a work in me. He wants the spirit that lives within us is constantly doing that work in our lives that is transforming us into holiness. And sometimes it hurts. He allows us to experience disease and loss and pain and handicap, these different things, so that we will cling to God, so that we will turn to God, so that we will abide with God and be faithful to God. Right? So that struggling brings about the submission, the humility, and the faithfulness to God. And that's where God can really work in our lives and bring about the blessing. And that's where our lives can really be a reflection or a blessing of the holiness and the goodness of God, right? When we're living for, through us, that's a reflection of God's goodness, right? It's not a reflection of how amazing I am. It's a reflection of how amazing God is. So it really glorifies God when he's working through his people. So I think there's a lot of takeaways, and we're not quite done yet. There are a couple verses here left, and we'll finish it. But there's a lot of takeaways here in this account where Jacob wrestled with God, and he was stubborn, and he fought, and they were in gridlock, and he didn't want to give up. And then this man gave him an out. He said, let me go. Just give in, give up, relax, release me. The sun's about to rise, and I know you have places to go and things to do. Just give in. Just let it go. And I know that I've been there in my life, where you're just stubborn, right? I was thinking of, an example. I remember when I was younger, I had a lot of angst and anger toward, and, if I had carried that with me my whole life, I imagine sitting on my deathbed thinking back all those years spent just being mad at my mom. I mean, how much regret would I have just that I didn't love her and accept her and understand her and forgive her? Not that there was anything, she didn't do anything horrible, but I think a lot of us kind of go through that phase where, we kind of blame our parents for, we have that victim kind of mentality where we blame somebody else for our own problems. And I certainly went through that. That was something that God had to work out of me, though, that anger and that hatred. God had to really show me through my own suffering that I needed to let go and I needed to love my mom, right? And God does that in a variety of ways with a variety of people. I mean, he can do it through addiction. He can do it through loss. He can do it through disease. He can do it through hardship. Here he gave Jacob a handicap. He shrunk the tendon of his thigh, and we're going to see that he's going to have a limp now because of it. And I grew up with a limp. I had children's arthritis. So I grew up with a limp, and I hated it. It really kind of set me apart from everyone else, and I felt like it really just. I know it didn't, but I felt like everybody looked at me like I was different and not worthy and less than and weak and sick and not so good, you know. And so now Jacob is going to have a limp because of this. So anyway, I think there's a lot of takeaways from this picture of being in gridlock with God because we don't want to give up whatever it is we're holding on to. And I think in the case here with Jacob, he was holding on to wanting to control the situation because he was afraid of losing everything. And so he felt like he had to take all these precautions to save his family. When really all he probably had to do was just be like, I'm marching into my homeland, and if Jacob has a problem with it, he can talk to my God. um, okay, so let's finish up the chapter here. So he gives him a new name. He names him Israel, for as a prince hast thou power, and with God and with men, and hast prevailed. We'll read it one more time over here in the ESV. Verse 28. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. And again, the prevailing wasn't because he overcame the man. The prevailing was because he gave in to the man. He gave in to this man he was wrestling with. Verse 29. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And it's curious here that the man doesn't tell him his name, at least here in this situation. He doesn't mention his name. He just says, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And remember that word wherefore, when we look up its meaning, it really encompasses all questions. The word wherefore is the what, who, why, where, when. That's what wherefore means. So he's saying, you know, why in the world are you asking my name? I think the man is saying, you already know who I am. You know good and well who I am. You know who you've been wrestling with. You're asking me to bless you. And I just got through telling you, you know, that you've striven with God and you've prevailed. All right, so he doesn't tell him. He doesn't answer him. He just says, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. So this word Peniel means face of God. So Jacob knows who he was wrestling with. He names that place. He gives it a name, the face of God. He says, for I have seen God face to face. So that's more evidence that these few verses right here where Jacob wrestles with this man, that he in fact was wrestling with God. And I believe it to be, you know, Jesus incarnate, or however you want to say it. You know, of course, Jesus hasn't been born yet as a human, but we see different accounts. We'll see in Exodus, we'll see this, we won't get into that, but we see different, there's a supernatural presence with God's people, and it could very well be Jesus Christ himself. And then it finishes up the final verse. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. My life is preserved. Oh, we got a couple more verses here, excuse me. He says, my life is preserved. When Jacob was wrestling with this man, he may have thought, if I can't overcome this man, he will kill me. Especially if he thought it was God wrestling that came to wrestle with him. You know, if God picks a fight with you, Jacob fought back. Instead of submitting to God, he fought back. And now he's saying, you know, my life is preserved. So he calls this place Peniel. And then he says, you know, and as he passed over Penuel, so he leaves that place and he heads back. He said, the sun arose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh, which means he limped. He limped off. Therefore, the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew that shrank. So this is just telling, the author here is Moses writing the book of Genesis, and it was their custom to avoid eating this particular tendon in the meat. They would have looked at that tendon and they would have known exactly what it represented, because this is how their people functioned. They didn't stare at a phone all day. They talked to one another. They talked about the stories. They passed down the accounts, the experiences, the people in their family, all of that. They talked about it a lot, and they had an understanding of these things. They would have known about this account where, you know, let's say the children of this man Jacob, Israel, they would have learned all about this day where he wrestled with God, where he was face to face with God, and it wasn't until he submitted to God that he prevailed in that situation. And that, you know, they instituted this this symbol that whenever they saw, the symbology was always important. You know, you saw a rainbow in the sky and it would remind you of something, that God was never going to flood the earth again. You saw this tendon of the thigh of a cow, you know, when you were butchering it or when you were eating it, and it would remind you of something important. Here it would remind them that Jacob, their father, their grandfather, whoever, to you and me, this patriarch, Hall of Famer in the Old Testament, he wrestled with God, and they were in gridlock. He would not give in. He was fighting for his life. And then this man, God, Jesus, whoever you want to say, he gave him an out. He said, let me go. And he said, I will let you go, but you got to bless me first. That's how the story went down. And so that's it. That's all of chapter 32. And so as we move on in the book of Genesis, we're going to see next week, it says, Jacob lifted up his eyes, I'll read the first verse, and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. Okay. So you can read ahead if you don't know how that story ends, or you can join me here next week and we'll go through it. But we're done for today. So I'm praying for my viewers that God gives you strength, that he gives you wisdom and discernment in these uncertain times. I pray that you have a hunger and a thirst for the holy word of God, and that you're reading your Bibles. I hope too that you are finding a way to be gathering with the brethren, as the Bible puts it, in holy fellowship with one another. I'm still not going back to church on Sundays. I've gone a few times. I went to an outdoor church this summer. My church is back, but my husband and I haven't gone back. I attend a weekly Bible study at the church. So I'm hoping that soon my husband and I will return back to church, but that's a whole nother sore subject we won't get into. But I'm praying that you're in the Word and that you're in the fellowship with other believers. It's such a powerful thing. I'm so thankful for the Bible study that I have, that I meet weekly. It's such an amazing experience of just love and support, and the opportunity to gather together with other believers who are unashamedly in love with Jesus Christ, and who have just a joy and a thrill and an excitement for his return and meeting him face to face. So that's a really uplifting experience, to gather together with other believers and to pray for one another. That's a really important part of our time together. So I pray that for you. I pray God keeps you from evil, and that he will intervene on your behalf and provide for your needs. And I pray that the work that he does in your life will glorify his holy name, right? And that it will be a reflection for the people in your lives. When they see you, they see God. And they see the work of God, the supernatural work of God that he's doing in your life. Sometimes when people change, it's a very profound, it can really affect others. They can be really curious, like, what happened to you? You're so different. And then that's an opportunity for that person to say, well, it's God. Like, God really got a hold of me and he changed me, like, in ways that I didn't think were possible. So I pray that for you as well. As we go forth this week, God bless you. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for watching. And that is it for today.